Ecclesiastes 1, verse 9. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of His Word.
Howdy. I guess I should try that again. Howdy, y'all. Good to see you. Before I get started, I want to go back to this thing we got going on next week with Bob Van Ornum. Thank you. A couple years ago, it was my buddy that we brought into church for a little weekend thing. And I remember I was jumping up and down. I was all excited. Y'all are going to love this. It's going to be great. Bring your friends, blah, 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 blah. And some of you did. But I had somebody come up to me, and this person knows who they are, and I'm not going to drop any names or anything like that. But somebody came up to me at the end of it. And they said, I wish that I had known how good this was going to be. I'd have brought somebody. And I don't say that to call this person out, because I've been there and I've done that. And I've said that to myself, but I didn't have the courage to say it to anybody else. So kudos on you, and you know who you are. However, let's all learn from that and say, Carl knows this guy. Carl, this is pretty good. Brian and Glenda were over at our house last week and wouldn't shut up about the guy. So I'm going to go out on a limb and venture to say that this is going to be worth our time. And it's going to be worth the time of our friends and our family. So bring somebody out, and we'll see you all here Friday at 7 o'clock. Huh? 6? 7? 7, right? Whew. I ain't going to make it by 6. 7 o'clock easy. No problem. Might even get dinner. All right, well, all that said. Religious Liberty Sabbath is here again. It comes once a year. Used to be at the end of January. Now it's in the middle of January. I really wish it was back at the end of January, but they didn't ask me, and that's that. So before you all fall asleep, I got something to confess. So a couple weeks ago, a member of our church here in our little congregation came up to me, and they had a concern about last year's Religious Liberty campaign. And this person mentioned that they dutifully took the Liberty Bond, filled it out, checked the box that says, you know what? I was going to do that. There we go. Check the box that says, I would like so please send me Liberty Magazine. Put the money in, and never got it. It's not really a confession. I'm not confessing that somebody came up to me and had a conversation. What I'm confessing is that I completely dropped the ball last year. I did get the requests in, but it was late, and apparently church members might not have gotten Liberty Magazine. The paperwork that I got this year from the union shows that Liberty Magazine last year was sent to a whole mess of people in Chatham and Lee counties. So I'm going to call it a mixed bag. Appreciate y'all giving so generously so that we were able to continue the subscriptions from the previous year for the mayor, the town managers, the sheriff, the judges, all that stuff. So
it might be that somebody got it who wasn't actually expecting it, and that could be a good thing too.
One never knows. I will promise you that probably most of the local politicians are not expecting to get it. Hopefully they're reading it. Anyway, I invite you guys to hold me accountable this year. And so I want to just kind of give you the schedule as I understand it. What you're looking at here is a very tiny, probably tiny to you, rendition of what their Liberty Bond looks like. You can give $250, just check that box and drop in a check. That's cool. You can give any amount. Now, as Carolee mentioned, today's loose offering goes to religious liberty. It does not go to giving you a subscription to Liberty Magazine. The loose offering today goes to send Liberty Magazine to people in federal government and state government. It funds I'm turning into Carl, can't talk today. It funds the North American Division Litigation Fund, which is used to defend religious liberty in court for church members and non-members. And also, part of it is returned back to the union to promote religious liberty education, such as providing the materials that they told me I could use for today's sermon, which I did not. So, on the screen is what the bond looks like. When you fill it out and you put it in a plate, you can check the box that says, yes, I would like to have a subscription. Please send me Liberty Magazine. Or you can check the box that says, this is a donation only. I do not want Liberty Magazine. If you want Liberty Magazine, you need to throw in $7. If you want to make sure that Liberty Magazine goes out to our local politicians, police, community leaders, and you want a subscription to Liberty Magazine, you need to put in more than $7. If you subscribe, the first issue you should get will be the May-June issue. It comes sometime in May. Now, each subscription costs $7, but that doesn't mean that if you want to make sure that you get it and that your neighbor gets it and that the mayor gets it, you have to put in exactly $21, right? If you want it, you got to put in the $7 for yourself. You ain't subsidizing that for you, unless you ask really nice. Anything that you can give beyond that will be used to make sure that Liberty Magazine goes out to these local officials. If we run out of these little Liberty bonds that are out on the Welcome Center, no big whoop. Put your money in a tithe envelope, stick a note in there, and that will let Lisa know whether or not you want a subscription. Lisa knows where I live, and she will make sure, she'll give me a spreadsheet that has the names of all the church members that get a subscription. And in case you're wondering, she ain't going to tell me who gave how much, because it ain't none of my business, and that's how she rolls. You couldn't get a word out of her with a crowbar. Now, if you say, you know what, Dave, we don't play baseball here, one strike, you're out, I gave last year, I didn't get my magazine, I'm mad. Fair enough. You can go to libertymagazine.org and do the whole thing from there. You can subscribe from there, you can donate from there. If you donate from there, it's not going to be part of what we're doing here locally, but it will still do the national and state stuff. Now, most important, for the love of all that is good and holy, do not come up to me and just tell me that you want a subscription and you put your money in the plate. The most certain way for you to not get Liberty Magazine is for you to rely on my memory. Is that clear? Don't come up and talk to me. I mean, come up and talk to me. I love y'all. Come up and ask me questions about this. But do not say, oh, hey, man, I put $7 in a plate. Can you make sure I get Liberty Magazine? No! Write it down on a piece of paper. Stick the paper in a plate. The plate, it goes to Lisa. Lisa is meticulous with all things church. She's not meticulous about anything else. She is meticulous about all things church. She will make sure that I know who to put on the big, stupid piece of paper that I have to mail in. Now, that sounds awful. On the flip side, silver lining, I'm really good at keeping secrets. You can tell me anything. I won't remember. Now, with that said, let's have a bit of prayer and then we'll move on. Heavenly Father, as we contemplate what Carolee said in the offering reading, we're reminded just how blessed we are to be here in your house, free to worship, not having to hide out in the basement, whispering, hoping to not hear the sound of the jackbooted thugs as they come to take us away. Lord, help us keep that freedom here and spread it as far in the world as we can, wherever we have any influence. So we ask in Jesus' name, amen. Anybody know that guy? It's 1967. Ronald Reagan. He was inaugurated as governor of California, believe it or not. And in his inauguration address, he said this. He said, "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same, or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in the United States when men were free." Now, I don't know what kind of freedom in particular Reagan was talking about, freedom in general. I'm obviously here before you on Sabbath morning concerned with religious freedom. Religious freedom, freedom of worship is enshrined in the First Amendment to our Constitution. And is it under attack in the United States? Sure, kind of. But if you think it's under attack in the United States, look around. Look around. Go to Iran on Sabbath morning in your Sabbath best. Knock on the door of a church. Oh, you won't find the door of a church. Well, anyway. Most of us been through a prophecy seminar, either here or somewhere. Most of us, right? So when Adventists put on a prophecy seminar, we like to start with what? What's like the first prophecy seminar, session 1, after the special music, after the speaker tells you who he is? What's the first image you see? Daniel chapter 2. You've been to more than one, haven't you? How about that? Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, if you don't know, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had a dream. Couldn't understand it, couldn't even remember it. Brings in all the priests, all the prophets, all the wise men, says, "Hey, I had this dream. Somebody tell me what I dreamt." They all say, "Yo, king, we don't do the tell you what you dreamt. We do the tell you what your dream meant." And he said, "You want bet? Tell me or die." Right? That's the summary of the first part of Daniel chapter 2. And I'm not going to fall off. Somebody's looking at me like I'm going to fall off. I hope I won't fall off. Well, Daniel finds out about this, prays about it. God tells him what the dream was, tells him what it meant. Daniel comes back, shares that with the king, gets promoted. All sorts of cool stuff happens, right? Well, what happens in Daniel chapter 3? Daniel chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar has a brilliant plan. See, in Daniel chapter 2, you've got the head of gold, the chest of silver, on down, right? So what Nebuchadnezzar says is, hey, if the different metals in that dream mean different kingdoms, like Daniel said, then the solution, hear me out, is let's just make the whole thing out of gold. Because the gold is me. I am golden. So Nebuchadnezzar comes up with this idea for a better reality. Let's make that whole sucker out of gold. But then he does something interesting. He doesn't just make an image out of gold to say, hey, Babylon rocks. Babylon's going to be here forever. We're cool. He says, everybody gather around in front of this big old metal thing that I had made and do what? Bow down. Worship. Well, that's weird. I mean, if the image of gold represents Babylon, because the head of gold represented Babylon, that's a government. That's a civil construct, not an ecclesiastical construct, right? Well, as it turns out, for most of Carl, what are you doing to me, man? For most of Earth's history, and indeed today, in much of the Earth today, the answer is kind of. It's kind of different. I mean, yes, there's a king, and yes, there's a priesthood, and yeah, they're not the same dude, but it's all about the exercise of power. And if the king decides he don't like what the priest says, well, we get the Daniel chapter 2 effect. says, because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Because at the time, of course, they were kind of like, they were like the wise guys in training, right? And you don't just see this in Daniel. You see it throughout the Bible. And I could be here for an hour, and actually when I started writing a sermon, I had like 18 examples of this that you see in the Bible. And I said, if I preach for 3 hours straight, somebody's going to throw something at me, even in church. So I cut it all out. You got questions? Talk to me later. By the time of Christ, things had changed a little bit. Some would say that society was a little bit more sophisticated. They started putting their pinky out when they drank out of their tea glasses or whatever. So rather than go on full Nebuchadnezzar style, where it's like, oh, really? Priest dude? Off with your head, or lion's den, or whatever. The civil authority just exerted influence. Not control. Oh, we would never do that. Influence over the religious authority. In the time of Christ, Rome, they didn't understand Judaism. They didn't like it. But more or less, they allowed the Jews to practice their own religion, including living under Jewish law, rabbinical law, under a couple conditions. Like, if you want to kill somebody, you can't do it yourself. You have to get Rome to do it for you, which is not a big deal because, Rome, they'll kill anybody. Right? But capital punishment was not allowed. So you legally, all the Old Testament stuff about, oh, you did this, you get stoned to death, not until Rome says okay. And the second thing was no revolutions. Ultimately, your loyalty has to be to Rome. Israel at the time, as you'll know, was ruled by a puppet king whose ultimate loyalty was not to God, but to Caesar. In other words, your basic politician. Fast forward a few hundred years, we come to the time of that fourth beast, the little horn power. And we see that the civil power is a little bit different. And here in Daniel 7, it says, after this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Who's that fourth beast? Rome. Yeah, you guys did pay attention in your evangelism series on Daniel and Revelation. It says, while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it. And behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. There we go. Skip down in the interpretation. This is the angel talking to Daniel. He says, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms, and will devour the whole earth, and tread it down, and crush it. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and will subdue 3 kings. He will speak out against the Most High, and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in time and law, and they will be given into his hand for time, times, and half a time. I forgot to make notes to advance my slides. I apologize. Now, usually in your basic Daniel and Revelation seminar, when we present the exegesis of this prophecy, we focus primarily on identifying who the fourth beast is, which you've all done, and identifying who the little horn is, which you're about to do. Who's the little horn? The papacy. Now, part of doing this identification is understanding what the difference is. How is this new power different? Now, y'all are good Bible students. You've done your prophecy series. You've given me the right answer so far. I'm going to trust that you continue and you know the answers. If you don't, if you need a refresher, let me know. We'll study it out. It'll be a great time. Who's that guy? Huh? How did you know that? Nobody was going to get that. Gold star. That is Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, if you speak English. Now, in December of 800, Pope Leo III crowned this dude, Charlemagne, as Emperor of Rome, despite the fact that 324 years had passed without that particular job being filled or being relevant. Charlemagne, Charles the Great, he'd been on a rampage, conquering Europe left and right, gone all over the place. I think that Leo probably thought, hey, looks like we're getting a band back together. Let me go ahead and make sure that this dude is on my side. I don't know, wasn't there. Not that old. But I do know this. Leo III, Pope, is the guy that decides if you go, not literally, but in the religious construct of the day, Leo's the guy that ultimately decides if you go to heaven, if you go to hell, or if you go someplace else. Right? So that's the source of ultimate power. So when Leo says, hey y'all, Chucky Boy is now king, because I said so, the people are not stupid. They go, oh, Chucky Boy's king, because Leo said so. Well, who's got the power in that relationship? It ain't the person wearing the crown. It's the person that says whether or not you can wear the crown, right? Now, this went on. This is 800 AD. This went on for another 998 years. And in fact, here and there, still goes on. But not for the whole empire. Now, over the years, I've read more than a little bit, as my wife will tell you, because she gets to hear me talk about all this stuff I read, about the rise of Protestantism in England, and how it came to be that one day Henry VIII decided that the English don't need no stinking pope no more. I mean, they've already got a Henry, right? Why do we need a pope when we got a Henry? And to this day, if you're the king or the queen of England, you are also the head, kind of the pope, of the Church of England, or if you're in America, the Anglican Church, right? It's a copy of the papacy done up so that Henry could kill his wife and get another one several times. So that's interesting. But recently I started kind of looking into the history of the Protestant movement in the rest of Europe, particularly in Germany, given how much of the Protestant movement originated in Germany. You got Luther and the boys. And because I don't want everybody to fall asleep, I only do this to my wife. She sleeps very well when I go on these tangents until I start elbowing her. I'm like, are you listening to me? This is awesome. She's like, it's 3 a.m, sleep. Well, we're going to get back in the Wayback Machine, but we're going to fast forward to the year 1555. It's a great year. 1555, in September, the city of Augsburg, a treaty was signed between two warring factions. This treaty, you can look it up, it's called the Peace of Augsburg. Does that say Peace of Augsburg? I have no idea. Don't read German. Don't read that scripty mess that the Germans like to do. Can't tell you. But I do know that that is the cover, the first page of the treaty. I do know that. I just don't know what it says. Well, I don't know what that says. I know what the treaty says. I'm about to tell you what the treaty said. So one of the factions that signed this was Charles V. Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor. He was the descendant of Charlemagne. And the other group that was fighting was this Confederation of Lutheran Princes, which I'm going to try to pronounce for you, although I don't know why, because it is difficult, and we've already established that I can't speak English today. But it was called the Schmalkaldic I had it last night. Schmalkaldic League. Schmalkaldic League. Now, the result of this treaty was the institution of a concept that, in Latin, is cuius regio, eius religio. And for all of you who forget your high school Latin, this translates to whose realm, his religion. which means that if your name is John Frederick I and you're in charge of Saxony and you're a Lutheran, then everybody in Saxony is a Lutheran, whether they want to be or not. If they're in Saxony and they don't want to be a Lutheran, they can go somewhere else. Somewhere where the person in charge of that area is the religion that they want to be. Now, the Schmalkaldic League and the Catholics are happy enough with this arrangement. But, by September of 1555, there was more to Christendom than Lutherans and Catholics, right? And it certainly isn't going to play well into the future. For example, the Calvinists. The Calvinists were already a large group in Germany at the time, and they were shut out completely. The Peace of Augsburg does not apply. Now, you're like me. You've been to evangelistic series. You may have come into the church as a result of an evangelistic series. Either way, you know what evangelism is about. It's about presenting biblical truth to somebody, letting the Holy Spirit work on them, and hoping that they will come around to see things the way that the Bible clearly explains it. So you might be thinking what I thought, which is this. Fine. But what happens if John Frederick or whoever changes teams? What if he says, you know what, I'm done with this Lutheran thing, I'm going to go be Catholic? Or vice versa. Does everybody living in that territory now have to change teams along with him? Well, the answer is yes. That's how it was. And what happens if somebody converts to a religion that's not Catholic or Lutheran? What then? You can't make everybody join a church that's not part of this Augsburg peace. Well, 1613, the Elector of Brandenburg happened to do just that. He switched from Team Luther to Team Calvin. But the Peace of Augsburg didn't apply. So, he couldn't make everybody that lives in Brandenburg change along with him. Can you imagine? This is Germany in the 1500s. All right? We're about to hold an evangelistic series. Now, let's just say that the mayor of Pittsburgh rocks up to our evangelistic series. Says, wow, I never heard this before. This is great. Joins our church. And the next Sabbath, whether they want to or not, every resident of the town has to show up here. Now, I want to be clear. I hope very much that every resident of the town will show up here one day. But I want them to do it of their own free will. Not because somebody forced them to, or not because they thought that it was the politically expedient thing to do. It needs to be on the basis of an individual's convictions. Anyway, you can see what this is. You can see how this is going to go, right? From 1555 to 1613 is already falling apart, and over the years, this just got more and more complicated. And sometimes, let's be honest, the regional monarch, the prince in charge of an area, just like, I'm a Lutheran and you're not, but I don't want to make you move. You got a good job. You pay your taxes. Right? So it became this whole mishmash. But there was enough of this going around. Enough of this, oh, you want to live here? Oh, you're a Lutheran. Oh, you want to live here? You're Calvinist, whether you want to be or not. You know how extensive this was? The border between Germany and Switzerland, the one that exists right now, was defined by Lutherans over here, Calvinists over here. That's why there's a border where it is. It's crazy. But crazier than that, at least to my little American brain, is the fact that these silly Germans, and I used to work for Siemens, a big German conglomerate, and Germans can complicate the snot out of anything. All right? Rather than at some point just coming to the conclusion that this notion is completely unworkable and that the religious affairs of it and the secular affairs just need to be separate, they just kept at it. Throughout the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, what happened is the royal families of an area, they formed their own church regionally. Again, Lutheran church if the ruler was Lutheran, Calvinist church if it, and so on. And those royals, through kind of like the system of patronage that we're all kind of familiar with hearing about from old times in Europe, they provided financial support for the church. Because, let's face it, they weren't paying nobody hardly anything to stay alive, so they had to. That's how it was, all the way through until the end of the German Empire after World War I. Now, after World War I, as you may remember from your history, Germany, in a bit of a shambles, right? Not doing so good. But the only thing that really changed as relates to this church and state thing is that there were no longer any royal families. The church was still part of and in bed with the government. So again, instead of saying, guys, this doesn't work, we don't even have royal families to keep this thing financially afloat, in the time of the Weimar Republic, churches remained public corporations. And instead of being subsidized by some prince or some royal family, they were subsidized from the local state governments. It would be like if instead of saying, look, y'all, tithing is important, offering is important, we said, pay your taxes, all right? They got a guy over in Raleigh that's going to make sure we're good to go. If you can imagine that. That's how it was. Actually, that's how it is. So, the churches got subsidized from the state for the services that they provided on behalf of government. These things are like running hospitals, right? Running kindergartens, religious education, because it's good for society. And so the government says, hey, we should support this. Now, I got a whole thing that I cut out of here because I didn't want anybody to think I was getting political, but George W. Bush and his thing about faith-based initiatives, not going to go there. Skip it. Now, like I said, this is the thing. It's still the thing today. It's how it is. The churches, you can give money to a church if you want to, buy a new organ or, whatever, stained glass window, what have you. But ultimately, it's about power. And if you want your free government money for running the hospitals and educating the children, your church has to be registered by the government in Germany. And it has to be accepted by the government in Germany as a valid church. Now, you might say, they've got the same thing in America, with the whole, tax exemption for churches and all that kind of stuff. We're like tiptoeing on the edge of that slippery slope with that. This is full on, you're not a government-sanctioned church? Then you're not a church. And you don't get a building, and you can't meet together on any day of the week that you choose. Now, this also means that if you are an established, registered government church, better be careful around the G-men, because your members aren't funding you. The conference isn't funding you. The North American division isn't funding you. The General Conference isn't funding you. The government's funding you. You, the local body of Christ, are depending on some bureaucrat instead of the Most High God. That's how it was, and that's how it is. Now, far be it from me to accuse any church leader of any denomination in any country at any time of playing politics and forgetting who we're supposed to have our trust in. And I want to be charitable and understanding, and I'm thinking about Germany after World War I. This is the time of a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread. Hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic. The old German Empire, society as it had been known for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, for longer than there has been to this day, United States of America, that society was gone. There were no prince. Gone. The old German Empire that everybody grew up knowing, gone. They were tough days. And the situation and this old geopolitical mess, and I ain't going to go into it, but by the time 1930s roll around, you got Hitler and the Nazis. Yay. Now, one of the central tenets of National Socialism or Nazism, is the concept of centralized control, total centralized control. Now, given that the church depends on the state to pay its pastors, to heat its buildings, to run its hospitals, to teach its children, etc., 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 well, it wasn't too long. As a matter of fact, it was a year after the Nazis came to power that the Lutherans, the Calvinists, and every other major Protestant group got rolled up into one big, happy church, the German Evangelical Church, or DEK for short, because saying German Evangelical Church is going to kill me. Now, in April of 1933, the Nazi government passed a law, and we call it the Aryan Paragraph. And what this law stipulated is that only Aryans could be employed in civil service. Now, what's an Aryan? Well, really, what it boils down to, and this is actually specified in the Aryan Paragraph, neither of your parents or any 4 of your grandparents could be of Jewish descent. Right? However far back you go for that, I don't know. Your spouse, same rules applied. Right? So you could be in the civil service and go, hey, I'm Aryan. My wife, not so sure, but I'm cool. And they go, no, you're not, bro. And of course, when this branches out, you go, oh, well, so it's my parents. Well, what happens if, like, I don't know, your grandmother or your grandfather died in World War I, your grandmother remarried? What about that dude's family? Still applies. Now, who cares, right? Well, what'd I say? The church is funded by the state. That makes the church a civil service. And this law applied to pastors and postmen alike. So you couldn't be the pastor of a church if one of your grandparents was part Jewish. The government telling the church who can and cannot stand in front of the congregation and deliver the Word of God. That happened in 1933. Now, everybody kind of knows the history of Nazi Germany, and you know that pretty much society just kind of went along with it. And of course, things were about to get much worse for non-Aryans and those who supported them. So the question is, what's a church to do? I mean, what would we do? Right? Edict comes down from on high. Says, I don't know, whatever. Pick an ethnicity, pick a group. May not be a pastor of a church. Excuse me? You, the government, going to tell us, the church, who can and can't pastor us? I mean, we got enough problem getting pastors as it is. Let alone winnowing based on irrelevant and uncontrollable information. In November of 1933, there was this big rally in Berlin. Lots of big rallies for the Nazis. They loved them big rallies. But this was a church rally. And I wish I had pictures of it. I looked and looked. I couldn't find a picture of it. But the descriptions that I read of this is a big church rally in Berlin. And there were banners everywhere. You guys have all seen, on the History Channel, like Nazi stuff. And there's banners everywhere, swastikas and all this stuff. But in addition to the swastika banners, there were banners that proclaimed the union of Christianity with Nazism. Woohoo! Jesus and the Nazis all together. Makes no sense. But being Germans, they weren't just partying and getting down. They had things to talk about. And these are the topics that were covered. Number 1, the removal of all pastors unsympathetic with National Socialism. So if you were against being a Nazi, you couldn't be a pastor. Forget about the Aryan Paragraph. You could be white as the pure driven snow, and if you just said, yo, this Nazi thing ain't working out, man, you were gone. 2, the expulsion of church members that were of Jewish descent to a separate church. In other words, hey, hey, Jewish person, you're a Christian? Well, you're not a Christian like we're Christians. That's what that says. The implementation of the Aryan Paragraph church-wide, Which means not only can you not serve as a pastor if you or your spouse has any Jewish blood, you can't be a member of the church. You can't come in here and sit down and worship with us if you have one grandparent that's Jewish. The removal of the Old Testament from the Bible. We don't need all that Jewish stuff, right? Now, Bible people, tell me, how much of the New Testament can you understand without the Old Testament? Not much. The removal of quote-unquote non-German elements from religious services. And I don't know exactly what that means. Couldn't find a transcript or an audio of this, Well, the audio would have done me no good. I don't speak German. But couldn't find a transcript. I don't know exactly what that means. And then finally, the adoption of a more heroic and positive interpretation of Jesus, who, in pro-Aryan fashion, should be portrayed to be battling mightily against corrupt Jewish influences. Can you imagine? Here's Jesus, the Jew. I guess not, because they'd have kicked him out of church. Matter of fact, I'd say, if you look at that list of things that they wanted to do, they did kick him out of church. Now, we've got evangelistic. Next week, we got Bob Van Ornum coming. I guarantee you 100% none of these things are going to be on his agenda. We got Daryl Bennett coming in next month to do the thing. He ain't talking about any of this. Evangelism Impact in Myrtle Beach coming up at the 1st of February. They ain't going to talk about this. 100% certain. But, like I said, most of the church just went along with this. Most of them weren't happy about this, right? Like, these people aren't stupid. So I don't know. Was it a lack of backbone? Was it a lack of theological understanding? Was it a poor relationship with Jesus? Or was it, what I think, just, what my dad said to my oldest brother when he joined the Navy. Keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, don't volunteer for anything. Go along to get along. I don't think we really know. Probably some mix of all those things, right? Well, this is a situation that led this dude, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, to write his book, Discipleship. And in English, you'll find it for sale, called The Cost of Discipleship. In German, it's just Discipleship. If you haven't read it, you ought to read it. It's not 100% like jiving with Adventist theology, but the overall themes are well worth your time. Now, thank God that there were some folks, some pastors. Bonhoeffer was a pastor, he was a theologian, he was a young man, that realized that the Aryan paragraph and the stuff that was coming from this, more Nazi-affiliated elements of the DEK were objectively 100% wrong. And guys, we live in an age where I got a brother, and I love my brother. All right, I got my brother, Lisa, nicest guy in the world, the nicest guy in the world. But I get in these heated arguments with him sometimes. Haven't in a while. I think he's come around. Well, that's okay for you, but maybe not for me. And there are some things that, well, I like steak. I do. My wife, she throws up at the smell of it. So I don't get steak very often. That kind of thing is, it's good for me, it's not okay for you. But there are some things in this world, kids, that are objectively right, and there are some things that are objectively wrong. 1934, this dude, Martin Niemöller, he organized a group of pastors and theologians to oppose what was happening within the church. And this group, I forget what they called it at first, it was like, one of those German words that's this long that translates to a paragraph. Society of Concerned Pastors or something like that. It eventually became called the Confessing Church. Called it that because they, like a lot of people did back in the day, wrote a confession, right? Kind of, this is what we believe. And if you wanted to be part of that church, you had to confess. It's good stuff. Niemöller wound up in Dachau for his trouble. And he narrowly escaped the fate that's so common there. This guy here, his name is Heinrich Gruber. Gruber was another pastor that joined this confessing church movement. And around about 1940, Adolf Eichmann, you guys know that name? Eichmann, really nice guy. Eichmann asked him a question. And he said, Pastor Gruber, given that you don't have any Jewish family and that no one will ever thank you for what you're doing, why do you insist on helping the Jews? Right? The Nazis saying, hey, we came up with the solution. We call it the final solution. What are you doing? You're messing us all up, man. And Gruber said something interesting. Matter of fact, he said something perfect. He said, the Good Samaritan did so, and my Lord bid me to do so. Now, you want to guess what happened to old Gruber after he said that to Eichmann to his face? Yeah, he went to Dachau too. He also survived. Not all the sinners did. Matter of fact, Bonhoeffer showed you his picture. He was killed, like 2 weeks before the concentration camp he was in was liberated. Because they finally figured, it's a whole long story. Now, these pastors, guys like I just showed you here, and a bunch of others, they lost their jobs, right? Because when you leave the DEK, you leave the only recognized church. Oh, you're going to go out with them, the confessing church. Oh, you're going to go be a Seventh-day Adventist now. Oh, really? You lose your job. Not only do you lose your job, but pastors, as civil servants, had an automatic deferment from serving in the military. Now, I have a problem with military service, and I thank you, those of you that are veterans that have served. But if you're in Germany and it's 1939 and you're getting the reports of what just happened in Poland to the point where you're willing to lose your job because you know that this is wrong, are you looking forward to getting drafted? Anybody? Put yourself in the shoes of those guys. Go, hey, if I stay as a pastor in the DEK, keep my head down, keep my mouth shut, and don't volunteer for anything, I'm good. I will survive. I will be well fed because the government makes sure that I, as a civil servant, have something to eat. At a time when Germans were eating their shoes. And by the end of World War II, it was bad. But there were men and women of principle who said, I don't care what the government says. I don't care what the church leaders say. I know what the Word of God says. And the Word of God says that what's going on here is wrong. And I cannot and will not be a part of it. And that's powerful. Members of the confessing church, because their church was not official, couldn't meet in a beautiful sanctuary like this, couldn't meet in public, couldn't meet in the open. They would go to like little remote villages out in the middle of nowhere where there was no SS around, hopefully, and they would meet very quietly. And they'd have to kind of like tuck their Bibles in their coat. And if you were the pastor, or if you were like a local elder, or you're just a person that's organizing local people that were part of this confessing church, you couldn't do what I'm doing right now. Stand up and deliver a sermon or a Bible study or just talk to people. Because that is subversive in the eyes of the government. And you will go to the concentration camp because you are, as they said, no better than a Jew. Right? That was the reality. Now, if you actually took action to help Jews escape, ooh, baby, you're going to the front of the line in the concentration camp. Now, I could go on literally for hours. I've got a stack of books on my nightstand like this tall. I'm turning into my father. It's true. I could tell you all about all of them, but I'm not going to because it's 12:15 and we've got to go. But, I think the closest corollary in most of our lifetimes is probably the civil rights movement here in America. But this is even more intense than that. This is the government and the church at the top of the stack. And you know what, Ismay? Except for your father, right? Except for your dad. That's a whole different thing. I'm talking about like in America. Sorry. Saw that she cracked a little smile at me. She's like, you know my dad. I do. But this is a time in the memory of some of you, like the real memory of some of you, not the book reading memory, I'm talking about the real memory, right? Where every Christian had to decide, whom will you serve? And that's why I think it's worth your time to learn about this, if you haven't already. Why? Well, because of Carl read. That which has been is that which will be. And that which has been done is that which will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. And this is what that means. That means for every one of us here today, everyone watching on YouTube, whatever, either because of some big macro political shenanigan in Washington or in some very personal, just me kind of way because of the circumstances of my family or my employment or whatever, there will be, if there has not already been, a time for you to choose. And the way this works is a choice is presented in one of two ways. Number one, like a no big deal. Like, it doesn't affect me, right? Oh, you only want Aryan pastors? All right, well, no big deal. Our pastor's an Aryan. Whatever. Folks, it was less than a year. It was 7 months from the time that they said, hey, only Aryan pastors, to the time they said, hey, only Aryan church members. 7 months. That's reality. That's what happened. But when it came down, it's like, Sam, Evan, he's a nice guy. I'm sure he's got paperwork saying that he's Aryan. He's cool. We'll be fine. 7 months later, bye, Imani. Right? Bye, Nate. Bye, Mary. Bye, everybody that's not white. Bye. We'll miss you. But we can't tell anybody that we'll miss you. 7 months. The other way is to make it look like there is no choice. You have to comply. And this is what I think we usually see in our daily life. I've heard it said to people. I've had it strongly hinted to me. Well, if you're not willing to work Saturday, don't bother coming in Monday. Anybody ever been told that? Or know somebody that's been told that? Hey, this business is open on Saturday. And we need people that are going to work when the company's working. Who are you going to depend on? Some soulless company that clearly doesn't care about you because they don't care about your personal, deeply held convictions. Or God, who knew you in the womb, who counted the hairs on your head, who knows the plans that he has for you, who loves you so much, he sent his son to pay for your sins. Who are you going to serve? Choose you this day. And friends, this is what our annual focus on religious liberty is really about. Yes, it's about getting a subscription to Liberty Magazine in your hands and in the hands of politicians and thought leaders throughout the country, at the state, and our local community. But we don't do this, we don't focus on this because Liberty Magazine is such a great magazine. And it's a pretty good read. We focus on this because what has been will be again. And there's a time coming when across this nation and across the world, church and state will be in bed together. And when that happens, the rights of every person to worship who, how, or if they please, will be trampled. There's no getting around that. There's no preventing it. Because prophecy is very clear. What there is the opportunity to delay it. To give ourselves the time to share the love of God with our community, with our family, to serve them as Jesus served us, and to love them as Jesus loved us. Now, I want to end by sharing something that Martin Niemöller, who I mentioned before, wrote in the aftermath of World War II. Now, Martin Niemöller, very complex person. I could spend 4 hours on him, and we'd all be confused at the end of it. But I'm not going to. I'm going to share the important stuff. Wrote a poem. You guys have all heard this. I promise you, you've heard it. You just didn't know who wrote it. Maybe. It says, first they came for the socialist, and I didn't speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I know that everyone here values the right and the ability to gather together on Sabbath morning to worship God in spirit and truth. I know you do. But you also know that that right and that opportunity does not extend throughout the world. And you also know, because we established early on, that there's coming a time where it will cease to extend here. You have to decide if you're going to speak out for those who aren't like you, right? Liberty Magazine funds, I told you at the very beginning, a legal thing where the church's lawyers can go in and they file amicus briefs, front of the court briefs, and they will actually go to court on your behalf. But the amicus briefs that they will file on behalf of anybody, of any religion who's being persecuted against. If you're a Muslim and you can't get housing because the landlord won't rent to a Muslim, and you take that to court, the Seventh-day Adventist Church will file an amicus brief and tell the court why it's important that liberty of conscience and religious liberty are important and must be protected. Because we understand that if we want these rights protected for us, we have to protect them for everyone. So you have to decide whether or not you're willing to speak out for those people who may worship differently than us. And one way that you can do that is to let Liberty Magazine speak for you. Because frankly, I love y'all. Ain't none of you going to go to Washington, knock on some senator's door, and get 15 minutes of their time. Not going to happen. Carol Lee may, because she probably grew up with a senator related to somebody, I don't know, but she's related to everybody. The rest of us, no chance. But this little Liberty Magazine comes out 6 times a year. Is the senator, the congressman going to read it? No, they have people for that. But guess what? Those people that they have for stuff like that are also the people that they have to write the actual legislation. These boneheads don't do any actual legislating. You guys know that. Watch a little C-SPAN. It's the people, right? The bureaucracy. That's the real power in America. So, you don't even know who those people are, let alone get 15 minutes of their time. But you can do that for $7, Liberty Magazine. So, just ask that you will please consider giving to this year's Liberty campaign. Your Liberty bond and your donation needs to be received and processed by Lisa before March 31st. And way before March 31st would be better, because March 31st is the date that I have to have all the info into the Southern Union for them to hopefully not lose. Now, as we've done in the past, if we have enough donations, we'll make sure that Liberty Magazine is sent to the officials in our area, right? The area of the church, the area that our members live in. So Pittsboro, Chatham County governments, Lee County, Sanford. If there's somebody that you want in particular to get it, let me know. not verbally. Please, maybe write it on your Liberty bond. Send me an email, something. Thank you very much. Let's close. Number 612.